to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Mr. Wilmer Chavarria, a school principal whose commitment to education propelled him from his very humble beginnings. And he is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. This is the first part of a two-part episode in which we will learn about Wilmer's story and the series of events that led him to explore the world in search of stories about humanity. However, above all else, this first episode is an homage to the one opportunity that single-handedly changed our lives, attending a United World College. Mr. Wilmer Chavarria, welcome to Latinx Can.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. We'll talk more about this, but at first I was really excited to talk to you because we have UWC in common. But after I got to know you a little better, I got even more excited because your story is fascinating. So why don't we start by talking a little bit about your heritage and where you come from?
I don't know much about my heritage only because I think I'm indigenous. I'm pretty sure I'm indigenous. I mean, it's pretty obvious from the way I look. But sadly, in my country, most of the Pacific side of the indigenous populations were historically disseminated or scattered in a way that made them forget their language and their culture, even their cuisine and all of that. And so much was eradicated by centuries of
colonization.
And conquest. And discrimination and slavery, quite a bit of that. And so even though in my country's Caribbean coast and the mountains, there's still some surviving languages and some indigenous communities. And I say surviving with all of the meaning attached to that because they're barely making it. I'm part of those communities that don't remember their language. I recognize that I'm probably, maybe 90% indigenous and then a little bit of everything else.
But you were born in Nicaragua, right?
Yeah, so I was and my family, we were born in one of those mountains, actually, that I was just talking about, where some indigenous communities still speak their original languages. They actually speak Spanish as a second language and some English Creole more on the Caribbean side. But my mom and my family, the generation before my mom, we were already being scattered for many reasons. And at my mom's side of things, during the Sandinista Contra War, we were scattered once more, and this time to be sent over the border to Honduras, over the northern border of Nicaragua. Yeah. And so we met other communities there from all kinds of places, and that's actually where I was born during the war, at the end of the war, at a refugee camp where my mom and my family were taken.
Yeah.
So if we had any hope to go back to our original roots, it was completely lost by the time we arrived at the refugee camp. Because, there was really no way. So many things going on in Latin America over the centuries, and especially these last few decades, that some families just ended up losing any sense of roots that they had. By the time the war ended, I had really no identity to anything, I didn't even have uncles or aunts. Or I had no family other than my mother. And I know a lot of people lived through that same experience of displacement.
Yeah, that is definitely something people don't think about at all, I think, unless you have to experience being displaced and actually have to live through that. But if you think about it, there's so many people in the world who live in a situation of displacement. And at some point we want to think that, that happened back in the days or 20 or 30 years ago, but it's happening right now. And like it brings to mind right now the news of the fires in Lesbos that are displacing all of these people from the largest refugee camp in Europe, and just not really knowing anything about it makes it hard to relate and to want to empathize a little bit more with that experience. So how was your experience growing up, not just in the refugee camp?
Yeah, I was telling you the other day how the refugee camp, that sounds like a, oh wow, a refugee, because we hear that in the news, we read about it, and we think of like, we associate the refugee experience as an extreme one, and it is. And nobody should have to be a refugee.
Right.
Nobody should have to go through that. But I was telling you the other day how that actually was a time of peace for us, for my family, because it was run by the United Nations, and we received an education, we received healthcare, we received basic food supplies. So we had a roof on, well, not a roof, but we had a tent and stuff where we could actually, find refuge, literally. And so it was a time of peace for us, and a time in which we were maybe not happy, but at least we were safe and we were not scared and hungry. Actually, at the end of the war, that's when things began to be hard, difficult for my family again, because we were repatriated into a country that we no longer knew, and we had no family, no friends, no nothing to go to, much less a home, much less a job, much less food even. And so from the moment my mother crossed the border back into Nicaragua, she didn't know where to go. She just knew that she had to make it work. And my oldest siblings were already teenagers, so they took to the streets to figure it out. They took to the streets to go and shine shoes, to sell things, to help wherever help was needed, just to beg for jobs, little jobs anywhere they could find them. And we were basically homeless. We were living under a tin panel that was leaning against a wall on the street. Like we literally were sleeping in the streets for some time. And ultimately, we were lucky that we got a tiny place where we could build a home with our own hands by the local municipality. And they were donating little pieces of land for people, especially refugees, to live. And those were in the lands that nobody wanted, because there was no access to water, nothing. There were no roads. It was like up in the hills where nobody went because it was so hard to do anything there.
Right.
Couldn't even build adobes out of mud to build your house, because the earth, the soil was so bad for everything. Fast forward 30 something years later, they're the most beautiful views in the world. I still live there. My mother and my family still live in the exact same place where we built our little mud house. And I post pictures of it sometimes on my Instagram or something, and people are like, wow, what is that? Because it looks like a resort. Because the lands had no value there. Nobody wanted them, so they had no value. Let's be nice and give it to these people who are in the streets. And well, we were very thankful for that. And I'm even more thankful now, because we have the best news in town.
Absolutely. It goes back to when things were simpler and not Instagrammable, right?
I didn't realize that the place was beautiful just because somebody was telling me on a comment on Instagram. Since I was a kid, with no shoes or anything, going to school with, under the rain or whatever, I remember just going out of my house, stepping out of our door and looking at the green mountains and thinking, wow, that's beautiful. And just looking at it. As a kid, I knew that was beautiful, even though nobody was telling me that it wasn't. It's just human nature. You know that a place is beautiful. You don't have to see it on Instagram. It is some of my childhood, the good parts of my childhood memories. Even though it was such a difficult time, at least we were lucky to have amazing viewers.
And Wilmer, no matter what challenges you guys faced as a family, you told me your mom was always very adamant of you guys receiving an education and making sure that even though you had to work in the streets and help your family and figure out how to move forward, education was not an option to skip. Tell us a little more about that experience.
So when my mom was repatriated into Nicaragua, we were homeless, poor. My mom would make money, a little bit of money by selling bread in the streets, but she was willing to do that. She didn't mind, being homeless, hungry, etc. And because she wanted to stay in that town, only because she wanted us to continue to go to school, because we got a taste of it at the refugee camp. They had a little school there, and she didn't want to disrupt that. She knew that we were in a very desperate situation. In fact, Nicaragua has always been lately in a very desperate situation. But if you can believe that, we were at the bottom of that. I mean, everybody was poor, but we were poorer than the poor.
Right.
And she knew that we had no choices. We really had no choices. And the only glimmer of hope that she understood we had was maybe through education. She knew that we were in desperate times and that we could use every second of our day and evening to try and find money for food. But she never, ever allowed us to skip a day of school, or to not do homework, or to slack in terms of our learning. If we had choices, education was always first. And that is something that I don't think it was ambiguous, and I don't think it was idealistic or anything. She was always very intentional and open about it. She would tell us what she was doing because she was intentional. She would literally say, no, you're not skipping school. We're poor. We don't have a choice. You have to go to school.
Right.
If we ever don't want to be poor, you have to go to school. I would be like, Mom, but you never went to school. Exactly. That's why we're poor. So, yeah, if my mom has left a legacy in, not just in our family, but in our greater circles, was her insistence that education has power.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that any of her children have proven otherwise. I think they've all proven that principle, right? And I'm not saying that success should be measured by how much money you have, but success should at least be measured by, one, whether you're happy or not, and two, whether you're not desperate for finding food for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can make that happen through yourself, but also through learning enough to advocate for yourself and for your community, to be advocates for social change so that other people are not in the same situation, then education has done its job. And I think that is true for myself, and that is true for my siblings. And that in itself is a success for what my mother wanted in the first place.
Absolutely. And it makes it simple, right? I think that there are people that might wonder whether, especially at the college level, whether it's worthy to have an education at that level or not. But when you have nothing, it becomes very simple in that if you have nothing else that helps you in life, having an education is the way, or is one of the most certain ways in which you can pull yourself upwards and try to make the situation better for yourself, for your family, and for the community that you belong to.
Exactly. And that's my number one advice for parents. Now that I'm a principal of schools, every time I speak with parents, I remind them, pay attention to the details. Pay attention to what you're doing on a daily basis, the choices you make, the words you use when you speak to that child, and what kind of message those things are sending. Are you encouraging that child to pursue their own growth, to love learning, to be curious, to be advocates for themselves and their communities? What are you doing for you? It's not whether you're buying them the best backpack. It's not whether you're signing them up for the best teacher or the best school, whatever that means. It's what you are doing and what your child is understanding about their priorities and what the value for them is in terms of education.
Absolutely. And so your mom made it very clear that you were going to go to school and that was not an option to skip. And then you also developed a love for film and for movies. Tell us a little bit about how you developed that and how that helped you develop as a teenager and an adult.
Yeah, well, I still want to, at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, make some movies, go back home and make some movies. But right now I'm taking a little period of my life in which I'm becoming very involved in education and hopefully soon in education policy. Also finishing my own education for one. I
Right.
just want to be done with school myself. I've been studying for a long time. Um, but film has always been something I love because by the time I went into middle school or secondary schools in Nicaragua, my siblings had were working in some local TV stations and radio stations. They were always such charismatic people, very intelligent guys that just, they were lovely to hang out with. And
Yeah.
I was a child, but I knew that everybody loved them because they were so friendly and, they were really nice guys. And I think that opened doors for them in spaces like that, in local media and stuff like that. And so slowly he began to, make a career out of that. And he got me involved in that as well. And as a teenager, back then when computers were barely starting to be a thing, etc., I was just fascinated by editing and cameras and lenses and all kinds of things. Little did I know that Instagram was going to become a thing.
Yeah.
In the future, I should have been ready for it. I wasted my time, but I was really into all kinds of things related to lenses, cameras, cinematography. Without knowing it, I was learning film and filmmaking, but I did it because we needed it for the local station. And when I was so lucky to win a United World College scholarship to go to Canada when I was 16,
Yeah.
I was already like a little teenage professional in multimedia.
Yeah.
From practice, because I had been doing it for 7 years. I started like at 9 years old.
Wow.
And so I went to Pearson. And back then, an interesting fact, there was the International Baccalaureate, the IB, did not offer anything related to film or multimedia or video or anything like that. I remember that my art teacher had to ask for a special exception so that they would allow me to do multimedia and videos for visual arts because they didn't list it as an allowed media. And now, last time I checked, actually it's part of their core. They actually offer it in many schools. I remember how hard it was for us to let the IB let me do video.
This must have been what, 2005, 2006?
2006.
Right. And Facebook came out only a couple of years later.
Exactly. Yeah. And like YouTube was like a startup at that time. And we were already from Pearson, we were already uploading videos on YouTube.
Wow.
Where they were when barely anyone knew about YouTube back then.
Right.
So I like that like interesting little piece there.
So let's back up a little bit. So you mentioned you went to the United World Colleges, but people listening probably don't have an idea of what the United World Colleges are. So tell us a little bit about how you heard. I think that's one of the best kept secrets in the world, how you heard about the United World Colleges and what that experience was like.
Well, if any of your listeners don't know what the United World colleges are, please go online and type United World Colleges because you're going to be fascinated by this thing.
Yes.
And I think that even if you yourself you're not, you don't have the age or whatever, you don't meet the criteria for that, please pass on the word because somebody might benefit from that information because virtually everybody who went to United World College heard about it from someone else. So word of mouth is a big, big deal. And I think some of the best candidates, some of the best students we get into the United World Colleges are people who would not have gone otherwise if it hadn't been because somebody told them. So I'm no exception.
Yeah.
I was the exact same way. Somebody in my town was applying to the United World Colleges because they had heard from somebody who was traveling in the mountain towns who happened to be a graduate. And this girl just kind of like curiously just asked what the United Colleges were. And then this person who was traveling told her everything about it, and she went and started applying. Then she was the cousin of a classmate of mine who told me that she was applying, and then I applied as well.
Of course.
So it was, yeah, that's how it works. That's why I couldn't start talking about the United World Colleges without making this public announcement first to please Google it and spread the word.
Yes.
Because it is an amazing, amazing, life-changing opportunity. And like many of my classmates at the United World Colleges, and like the host of this show as well, we wouldn't have been able to go without that. And for me, it was life-changing, like for many of our classmates as well. As you heard in a bit of what I've shared, I grew up very poor in rather desperate situations, in very, very little means and almost nothing. But I also grew up in a family that loved learning, and we were excited to go to school and all that. But the moment I went to the United World Colleges, it literally changed my life, and not in a romanticized way, or not in a like this movie type of way, in a very real way, actually.
It's very tangible what you get out of it.
Yeah, it's not that it's such a beautiful experience. No, it literally sent me to expensive colleges, which sent me to expensive this and expensive that. Now I have a job, a pretty well-paying job in the United States, that wouldn't have been possible if those pieces hadn't come together. And it all began with winning the scholarship for the United World Colleges. And I'm not saying that you go to the United World Colleges to make money, but we're also not going to brush that aside either, because going to one of these colleges really opens all kinds of doors, including your financial and work stability for the future. And so I'm not going to ignore that just to say, of course, you can go read about the United World Colleges and you'll see that it is amazing in every sense of the word.
Yes.
But the part that they're not going to say is also, you're going to get really good jobs with this education.
Yes, it's true. They should put that in the brochures too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and especially for people. I'm going to give you an opportunity just now to get a little more into the nitty gritty of what the scholarship is like and what we pursue in the UWC education. But what I'll add now is that, especially for people who live in less privileged countries like you and me, you in Nicaragua, I was born in Venezuela, and there are many, many other people out there who have very little opportunities for one way or another, depending on the economic and political situations in their countries. And when you get a scholarship to go to UWC, then you also, like you said, you have this opportunity to continue your education and a lot more opportunities that perhaps you wouldn't have in your hometown. But let's go back and let's talk a little bit about how does the scholarship process works, and what type of education do you get when you are at UWC?
You begin first by asking the questions, and at the time, with very limited access to the internet was there. It's just that it wasn't as readily available as it is. And even the UWC movement didn't have as much information as now. Now you can literally go on Facebook, find your national committee, and you'll see all the information on how to apply, what requisites you have to meet, the criteria, what the dates are. In real time, you can literally just send a WhatsApp or a messenger message on Facebook to the representative. They'll get back to you within 24 hours. We didn't have that back then.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But the application process remains pretty much the same. So just go and find what the specific dates are for your country, what the criteria are, and figure that out first, because it may vary from country to country, but it's really easy to access via Facebook or Google. Each country has its own national committee, so it's enough to Google. Let's say if I'm from Costa Rica, say Costa Rica United World College committee, and then you should find the information that you're looking for. After that, you fill out your application, put together a really nice bundle of the things that sell you and say you are unique and amazing. And so once you read what the United World Colleges are looking for, then you can start thinking, am I a good fit for this? And if your answers are yes, then you probably should apply.
Yes.
The United World Colleges accept people that sometimes did not even think they were going to get in. The national committees are looking for people, first, that will take advantage of the experience, but two that are ready to engage meaningfully, not just through academics, but also through social activities and social experiences with students who are extremely different from who you are.
Yeah.
The last person we want to send to is somebody who's intolerant of differences.
Yes.
So if you don't know how to get along with your classmates in your town who are all the same color, speak the same language, have the same religion, then you're probably not a good fit for a college that has all sorts of religions, all sorts of languages, all sorts of races, all sorts of personalities and talents and everything. That's the beauty of the United World Colleges. And if you think that that would be a really cool thing to do, an experience, then it might be a good fit for you.
And so, well, what we study when we go to UWC, and I think this was actually very important for me, was that you can get that kind of experience, not to the same extent when you do like an exchange program, but what you get with UWC is, first of all, something that is way more diverse than anything that you can imagine, because it's made on purpose to be diverse and inclusive. But you also get the International Baccalaureate Education, which is a very rigorous program that prepares you really well to then continue your university and your college education after that. Maybe what we should also say is that most people go to your UWC through a scholarship. So can you also talk a little bit about what type of financial assistance are we looking at when people finish UWC and then they want to pursue an education in the United States like you did?
Yeah, so, well, first, to go to UWC, every school, every UWC, what we mean by UWC, we mean United World College. And there's about, I don't know, like 16 now or more. There were 11 when I went. So each UWC has its own policies around tuition and the cost of education and all that. When I went under a full scholarship for different reasons. Not everybody gets a full scholarship, but that will be a very individual process that you'll find out when you apply. But what I didn't know when I went, and what many didn't know when we went, because that was a very new thing, new development, was that there were new opportunities for scholarships to study university in the United States that you were entitled to just because you graduated from a United World College. I went to a UWC thinking I'm going there for 2 years, then I'm going to come back. And a lot of people did go under that impression as well at the time. It wasn't until my second year that I was told, no, you actually don't have to go back, because there's this really cool scholarship that you can get if you go to a university in the United States. And I inquired, like many people did at the time. And I was so pleased to see that that scholarship basically covered, in combination with some scholarship that I also got from the college, from the college in the United States, covered my whole tuition and then some, because they even supported me with other things like it's not only tuition. I think most people also get housing, meals.
Yes.
And in my case, I even got some travel. And so that was really nice, because obviously I on my own wasn't able to afford any of that.
Yes.
After my education in the United World College, which I forgot to say, my UWC was in Canada. After leaving Canada, I still didn't have any money to pay for a plane ticket or to much less pay like dozens of thousands of dollars to go to a university in the United States. So we got that very nice scholarship. It's called the Davis Scholarship. It's very, very popular now. It was barely starting at the time. And but I'm glad now that it has expanded and a lot more students have access to that opportunity. So if you're a graduate from the United World Colleges, you more than likely qualify for that scholarship. And then once you're in the universities in the United States, you can even access to even more opportunities. of all sorts, and that varies from college to college, from student to student. So I just invite you to Google that and inquire about those things. But in my own experience, I love the other opportunities that I had once I was in the United States. I even got a chance to, I don't know that I told you this when we spoke last time, but I did meet Shelby Davis, who is the guy responsible for these scholarships, because of the videos that we talked about. Since I was known to make videos, they flew me down to Florida from Indiana.
For real?
With Shelby Davis, because he wanted to make a video with me about sending a message to all the Davis scholars to tell them about how after we graduate, we should remember to give back to our colleges, to make gifts when we have jobs and all that, just to kind of like use himself as an example of how we give back. And so that was pretty interesting how I went for a weekend to Florida to be with him. There is actually a video that I'm gonna send to you. It's still there on YouTube.
Absolutely, and we'll put it in the show notes so people can see. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the reasoning behind Shelby Davis' investment in UWC? Because people probably don't know, he used to be an investment guy in Wall Street, and one day decided that it was time for him to go back or to give back, and he decided to invest in the UWC and the people who go to UWC. So tell us a little bit about his philosophy and why he decided to invest in this type of people.
I remember meeting part of his family as well on that trip, and then I began to see that it wasn't him alone. I feel like this was a family thing that I think he admires his mother a lot. I believe his mother passed away a few years back. And she was a lot of the inspiration from the way he feels about, how you see money. And he understands that sometimes people have too much money. And the least you could do is give back. And I think that was the point of that conversation that we were having, to give that money back. But sometimes people, like in his position, are at a very privileged, well, he's already very privileged to have so much money, but also at a very privileged position to be able to invest that money now, not the way he did it or the way his family did it in Wall Street,
right?
But invest that money now in human capital in very strategic ways. So let's say in the way you think about investment, he thinks about investment because that's what he did all his life. What is the best way to invest into the world, to improve the world and to improve the lives of the largest possible number of people in the world? And he was somebody whose mother and himself eventually believed very much, just like my own mother. And I remember having this conversation with him, that education is the answer. If you have a pile of money and you think about what's the best investment you can do with that money, then that's education. And then after you tell yourself that's the best investment, that's the best thing we can invest on, that's education. But specifically, what kind of education, or who should we be giving this money to? And he had the series of experiences that he lived in his life ended up making it so that he ended up finding out about UWC, specifically at the United States UWC, the American West UWC in New Mexico, which I actually lived by for like the last 7 years. I was a host family for...
Oh, that is so nice.
So I hosted students from there because I lived very close to the college. And so I remember going there multiple times to their celebrations and stuff like that. And I got to hear a lot about the history and relationship between Shelby Davis and that specific college. And then I was, I'm really grateful to this college, because even though mine was in Canada, I ended up benefiting from the relationship that Shelby Davis had with this specific college. And he understood that he wasn't just investing in this one campus, but he was investing in all schools across the world, and the students, the high quality students that were coming out of these places. So I think he began this strategically. He wasn't just going to hand out money to anybody who asked for it. He was handing out money to students who already had a proven record. Because just to get to the United World College, you have to go through a lot to prove that you're worthy of that education. And then having graduated from it is already a test So Shelby Davis felt confident that that was the best investment of his money. And I think he was right, not because I ended up benefiting from it, but because I would do the same.
Yes, I think his strategy was very good. And like you said, he wanted to make sure that there has to be some betting for where to put your money, and the United World Colleges were already doing the betting, right? And another thing to clarify is that when you try to get one of these Davis scholarships to go to college, you have to get to university. You have to get accepted by yourself before you're even considered for the opportunity. So you get in based on your merits, just like you did when you got into UWC, and then you have the financial support from the Davis Foundation so that you can continue to develop your talent and continue passing it on to the people who live there with you or go to class with you, and then further on into your own community and the people around you.
Correct.
And so when you went to college in the U.S., you went to Earlham College. And one of the things, like you mentioned, you pursued a lot of this film passion by designing your own coursework in cinematographic arts, I think is what you called it. And one of the things that you did was film a series of videos related to war. Tell us a little bit more about how you found the financial support to film these movies that you did, and then also the motivation to do it in the topic that you did it.
So speaking of Shelby Davis, he or part of the programs that he funded was this thing called Davis Projects for Peace. That was a series of gifts to different colleges across the United States for students to do projects that related to peace, things that advance peace across the world. And so you could apply to those grants. They were $10,000 grants. And so I applied for one, and all I wanted to do was go and do some documenting of stories and experiences in places that were going through conflict or that had experienced recent conflict. I mean, I said at the beginning, our family and I were the product of a conflict, of a war. And so I was interested in some of these stories, including my own mom's stories and my siblings and the people in my community. And so I did get the grant, a version of the grant, at least $10,000, but it was the match that the president of the college did to the Davis. So the college would get a Davis Projects for Peace was called. So they would get $10,000 for a project. But the president of our college added $10,000 more for a project that the school would choose, a project of their choosing. And so they chose my project, the college. Yeah, so that's how I got funding for that. And so I went to Palestine, Israel, and then different parts of Central America, mainly Nicaragua. And so in Nicaragua, I documented testimonies of war from both sides, especially stories of loss and pain. And then in the Middle East, I just followed a group of students from Palestine that were trying to going onto the other side, to the Israeli side, and go to some places that they would have never accessed otherwise. But we were in a project that was trying to help them access some places where children from these Palestinian areas were not normally allowed to. So all of the learning and the internal growing and challenges that they're facing through this process, I remember we were documenting all that as well.
With this powerful reflection, we end the first part of this episode. If you found Wilmer's story inspiring, I encourage you to listen to the second part, where we will learn how Wilmer became a teacher and shortly after a school principal. If you are a parent, a tia or tío, or if there is a child in your life, please don't miss out on the second part, because Wilmer speaks his heart about what we, Latinx adults, need to do to ensure our Latinx kids and the children in our lives receive the education they are entitled to despite the pandemic. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, you can follow us on Instagram at LatinxCan. If you have questions or feedback for us, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you like this episode, please leave a review. It is the quickest way to grow as a community. Once again, thank you for listening, and remember, unidos somos más.